to provoke the minds, basically, what the problems are. First of all, let me just say that with this meeting, my age-old dream came true. Over the past 40 years, since I'm involved in international water business, and we were always dreaming about having meetings with the finance community. Well, we didn't go further than our colleagues in the World Bank, but I hardly met financiers at large gatherings. So indeed, this is a very unique opportunity for me to talk to, as the notice students used to say, talk to the money bags. This was the missing connection. But first of all, for those who might have not been here at the very beginning, the question what we have here is basically, what is the purpose of this water summit? The purpose is to find solutions to a looming water crisis. That is not only looming, but in many regards, it already is with us. Now, I will talk about lots of risks, water risks. So the challenge we all have is how to turn these risks into an opportunity, and what the role of the private equity industry could be there. What sort of business opportunities are there that could be interesting for the private financiers? And there are many, because in the coming years, trillions of dollars need to be invested into the water business. One of the reasons is that like the world population, the distribution of water is not uniform. And here are some of the hotspots that may be coming up in the coming decades, or if not earlier. Asia, where currently 60% of the world population lives, with 36% of the total water resources. Grosso modo, this is a steady state figure, but still shows there's a huge discrepancy between the resource availability and the number of users. The resource is going to be the same. It didn't change since the Holocene climate optimum, but the number of users will go up. The present population of the world will be living in Asia. This will have a conflict potential unless we do something, unless we invest into engineering structures and otherwise. A great deal has been done since the Millennium Development Goals started at the beginning of this century. And this is a distorted map that shows the non-accessibility to drinking water. If you look at it, North America doesn't exist, Western and Middle Central Europe doesn't exist, Australia doesn't exist, but it shows the dimension of the problems. The problems are there, particularly, and the business opportunities as well, are there in Sub-Saharan Africa, in China, and in India. A few years back, an interesting paper has been published by Johan Rockström, who leads the Stockholm Resilience Institute, and he was asking the questions that, what are the planetary limits with respect to certain environmental variables? Those limits, if we go beyond those limits, things will become irreversible. We will go beyond the point of no return, as the pilots say. We're going to be out of fuel. And from that point of view, things will be pretty bad. He said that, well, we probably are beyond that point of no return in terms of biodiversity. We are, and this was prior to the Paris Agreement, we are beyond the point of no return in terms of the climate change. And he was very comfortable saying that when it comes to global freshwater use, in this pie diagram, when it comes to freshwater use, we are okay. There's no problem, because that limit, which is roughly 4,000 cubic kilometer withdrawal annually, is far. Now, how far is it? A couple of years and we are there. A couple of years we will be there in reaching that planetary limit of no return, when things will flip over to instability. And then this diagram, which means that in 20 years' time or so, we will probably reach that That limit is not rigid, but it's rather fuzzy. But still, we will be there soon, particularly in agriculture water use, where 80% of the agriculture water use, where the total water use is 80% from agriculture. Now, this is pretty bad because this is already driven by one of the big drivers. There are two huge drivers. One of them is population growth. If you look at the 20th century alone, when the population from 2 billion grew up to 6 billion, that means a threefold increase. In the same period, we had a sixfold increase in water withdrawal. So we had a sort of a scissor that opened up, which clearly indicates the unsustainability of the current practices. Now, if you look back the past 6 years, well, not even 5 years, ever since the Sustainable Development Goals started, we see now that we are off the track. So this crisis is coming faster than we expected. And superimposed on the population-induced changes and secondary changes, such as urbanization, such as the land degradation, such as the reduction of arable land, we have here the bad guy coming, superimposed on the population-induced changes. Now people are asking, well, how bad is that? It's pretty bad. But if you look at hydrological change, 80% of the change is coming or is population-driven, and 20% roughly, according to our simulation studies, is climate-related. The problem, however, is that not only the climate is changing, which has changed over the past 4 billion years. I mean, if we were not here, if there were no climate change, we would not be sitting here comfortably. But what happened is that ever since the Industrial Revolution, we pumped greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and around the 30s or 40s of the 20th century, things started to be visible. Seemed that the hydrological cycle went crazy, and we didn't understand why it is happening. It seemed that the hydrological cycle is accelerating. Why? Because we have observed that the probability of the extremes went up. We have more floods, but at the same time, to keep the first law of thermodynamics at bay, we also had the other extreme, the droughts, going up. So we had a rather bizarre situation that floods and droughts are increasing. What to do in that sense, particularly if you look at what happened alone in the 20th century. You came to the conclusion for all the disasters, water is the biggest killer. 80% of the death and loss in property is water-related. And within the water-related disasters, drought is the biggest killer. So indeed, we can say pretty safely that the time of easy water is over. We have a looming crisis ahead of us, which is the result of the Anthropocene. Some of the geologists are still arguing that whether is it really right to name it as a new geological epoch. But indeed, the whole hydrological cycle has been changed by the industrial activities, by polluting the groundwater resources, by agricultural activities. So we here have a totally new ballgame. And that's why governments agreed 4 years ago to launch the Sustainable Development Goals, and there are altogether 17 goals. The most important one is that by 2030, there will be no more poverty. That's a tall order. By 2030, there will be no more hunger. And then they created 17 goals. So I used to ask my students, what is the goal that if you take out from the 17 goals of the Sustainable Development Goal system, the whole thing will collapse? And if the answer is not water, reflects, or she. Because if you think it over, of all the SDGs, really the centerpiece is water and sanitation. Just an example for sanitation. In Africa, every dollar that is invested into the sanitation sector saves $4 at the level of the national economy, simply because reducing the public health risks. So what's going to happen? Do we have more floods? Yes, we will. It will probably occur in the coming 60 to 70 years. Even if governments stick to the Paris Agreement, even if the increment in the overall temperature could be kept below 1.8 degrees. I know there are some politicians in the world whose scientific, put it that way, education is probably in the zero, epsilon domain of zero, who would like to jump out of this treaty. The thing is that there's not much good news, because it's gonna be worse. Like, the problem is not the overall increase in the temperature, but the acceleration of the hydrological cycle combined with the expansion of the oceans, heat expansion. It's a very simple thing. So the coastal zones will have a difficult time. Climate change, ladies and gentlemen, is all about water. 80% of the climate change impacts are manifested through, with, and by water. So mitigation, which the Paris Agreement describes, is wonderful. But as it took 200 years for humanity to basically change the climate system in a perceptible way, it will not happen overnight, and it will not go back to the situation we had in the 18th century. So therefore, the other option what we have is adaptation. We need to increase adaptive water resources management by increasing the resiliencies of our system. Because basically we have two systems. Either we go where the water is, or we take water where we are. Through water transfer projects, for instance, what happens in China, that the Yangtze is going to be more wet, the basin, while the Huanghe, the Yellow River up there, is going to be more dry. Beijing is running out of water, so they made a huge pipeline. It's an artificial river, which we don't really know in much details. All in all, humanity will need more storage, as simple as that. In order to store extra water, excess water during flood seasons for seasons which are dry, humanity will need water transfer. In the 90s, it became a four-letter word, but we have to go back again and revisit the basic. The technology we have is now amazing. Ever since there is no computational barrier, basically since the middle of the 90s, we can compute anything. We have satellite systems which every single day relay data to the Earth. 1 billion gigabyte hydrologically relevant data is relayed to the Earth. While 40 years ago, the engineers were always complaining that we don't have enough data. Now they are complaining that we have too many data. Well, how can we extract the pattern which is in there? Luckily, there are these new algorithms, pattern recognition, artificial intelligence algorithms, which are very, very fast. Or, and this is your domain, which is coming into use soon in water resources management, blockchain technologies. This is not a fad. This will fundamentally change and hopefully will lead to a paradigm change. We need to introduce, therefore, new innovative technologies. Therefore, we need to work together, the scientific and engineering community and the policy community with the finance community, by introducing new things like artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, which we are working on currently. Finally, water is not only, quote unquote, a financial issue, but it's basically an ethical issue. Reason why is that almost everywhere, now don't think of Africa only. This country in the middle of Central Europe, if you go to the eastern part of it, Slovakia east of Košice, in Hungary east of Debrecen, in Romania in the Barcium, and you visit the gypsy settlements, informal settlements. I was working in Kampala quite a lot. I feel back home. I'm in Kampala. The role of water in bringing people out of poverty is incredible. Very powerful tool. But that's where we need to invest. That's where we need to bring in new capital, because indeed the poorest are the most vulnerable. So in summary, and I hope I was provocative enough, I don't have many good news. the only good news I have, that as the crisis is caused by us, we are the only ones who can solve this crisis, or we pray every day for